Shalom. Chag Sameach to you all. This is a great pleasure for me to spend Chag Shavuot together with you. Some years have passed since we were together, but yet we're feeling so close to each other. And in times of distress, we even feel closer. The amount of phone calls and texts that I got throughout the last week were unbelievable. And I'm very, very thankful for that. Running a 1,000 family congregation in Israel called Yozma is a both difficult and challenging thing to do during the last 2 years. But thanks to you, we're managing, and we're managing very well. Thank you all. Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Su Israel vegoalo. Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Su Israel vegoalo. Barech, Barech, et Medinat Yisrael, והשיט צמיחת גאולתנו, הגן עליה ברוב חסדך, ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך. אבינו, אבינו, שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו. Bless the soldiers of Israel's defense forces and everyone who stands guard in order to protect our people. May the Holy One of Blessing protect them and save them from all troubles and affliction, from all sickness and injury, and send blessing to all their endeavors. May the words of the prophets come to fruition through them, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn war anymore. And we will sit under our vine and our fig tree, and none will make us afraid. And let us say all, Amen. Chag Sameach v'Shaket. A quiet, a peaceful, happy holiday.
Shalom and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moshe Katz, and I am proud to be the board chair of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. Thank you all for joining us today to show your love and support for our beloved Israel. In my address to the community for Yom Ha'atzmaut, I shared the words of Rabbi Halevi. In my address to the community for Yom Ha'atzmaut, I shared the words of Rabbi Halevi while living in Spain. He said, Libi b'mizrach v'anochi b'sof ma'arav. My heart is in the east while I'm in the farthest point of the west. The longing I had then to be in Israel pales in comparison to the pain we are all feeling today as we watch and listen to the news or talk to family and friends in Israel. Like many of you, when I can't find words of my own, I turn to others who have said it better than I ever could. And today, I'd like to read a few stanzas from two different songs. For those of you who know the melodies, please recall them as I share their translations. The first is Naomi Shemer's haunting appeal for peace in Al Kol Ele, for all these. Don't uproot what has been planted, so our bounty may increase. Let our dearest wish be granted. Bring us peace, oh bring us peace. Save the houses that we live in, the small fences in the wall. From the sudden war like thunder, may you save them all. Guard the little child I've been given. Guard the hill my child might climb. Let the fruit that's yet to be ripened not be plucked before its time. The second is from Ehud Manor's ballad, made famous and sung hauntingly by Corinne Elal, Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other country. I have no other country, even if my land is aflame. Just the word in Hebrew pierces my vein and soul. With a pain-filled body, with a hungry heart, here's my home. With a pain-filled body, with a hungry heart, here is my home. I thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing this time together with our wonderful guests and presenters. Thank you to my dear friend, my brother, Rabbi Barkin. Thank you to our wonderful Council General to the Midwest, Aviv Ezra. To my partner, Miriam Rosenzweig, thank you for coming to Milwaukee and calling it home. Thank you to Yossi, Klein, Halevi. I wish we were under different circumstances, drinking a cup of coffee someplace in Israel. And I'd rather be that than doing this now. To our Shinim, Noam, and Mai, and to our Israel Fellowship head, and our amazing Shaliach Uria, Ein Kamochem, there's just no one like you. To Rabbi Kalmer and Cantor Nguyen, may God hear your prayers as our community, near and far, will hear that echo. Thank you all for being here today.
Shalom to all our friends in Wisconsin. It is with deep appreciation that I'm sending this message on behalf of the State of Israel and on behalf of the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest, based right here in Chicago. I want to express deep appreciation for your voice coming together with all the communities across Wisconsin, sending one message: we stand with Israel. Let me tell you, these were extremely tense 72 hours with so many, almost I would say 2,000 rockets that are shelling upon our heads, millions that are in shelters, people that have died, injured. At the end of the day, so many harsh prices to pay. And I ask myself in these times the WWAD question: what would America do? What would America do if not 2,000, not 200, not 20, not one rocket will fall and rain upon its citizens? And I know the answer. The answer to that is pretty clear and 100% understood. America, like Israel, would have exercised its right for self-defense. And this is what Israel exactly is doing at this point. My friends, people will talk to you about certain incidents and certain tactical events that have happened. And yes, Israel knows that from time to time there are mistakes that have been done. There's no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, we are now in a junction of history. And the reasons for these violence and these events are not because of certain tactical events. The reason is that we are standing now in a junction in history, which is a choice between a radical, vicious, murderous regime in the shape of Hamas versus supporting a liberal democracy fighting for its life and fighting for its values in an extremely tough neighborhood. Hamas is not shy about what he believes in. He believes in wiping Israel off the map. He writes it in its charter. And at the end of the day, unfortunately for him, we have a strong, independent, sovereign state of Israel with the ability to defend itself by itself. Hamas is conducting a double war crime. Double. Not only is he firing only at Israeli civilians, he's also actually doing that from within a civilian population of its own, knowing that Israel is very restricted in responding because it's very sensitive to harming any civilian, Palestinian civilians. So in a sense, Hamas is in charge and responsible for both hitting Israeli civilians, but also for the death of Palestinian civilians. At the end of the day, while Israel is focusing on extending the peace accords with our moderate friends, Jordan, Egypt, Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, and many others to the Abraham Accord, unfortunately, Hamas is dealing in focusing on how to enhance killing and how to enhance extraction of Jews and Israelis from Israel out. At the end of the day, my friends, I would like to again thank you for your support at this hectic period of time. And I look forward as soon as possible for the ability to extend once again an open invitation to so many great friends of ours to come to Israel. Thank you, pray for Jerusalem, and thank you for standing with Israel.
Welcome. My name is Miriam Rosenzweig, and I'm the president and the CEO of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. I want to welcome the over 46 Jewish organizations across the state of Wisconsin who have partnered with us on this solidarity event. It is poignant that this event is happening on Erev Shavuot, a holiday in which we accepted the Torah as a nation. And our sages reminds us that it was not only the people who were at Sinai, who had left Egypt, who were at the acceptance of the Torah, but that all Jewish souls were at Sinai, not only that generation. That is what we're doing today. All Jewish souls are coming together in solidarity with the Jewish community in Israel, with the state of Israel, and with the right of a sovereign country to defend itself. Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel, says, Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not yet lost. And we know that for many of us watching the last week, it has been hard, and it has been hard to have hope. So what is today? Today is about standing we safe together. It is about understanding that this is complicated, that we all have feelings, but the idea that Israel has a right to exist is not something that we feel complicated about. It is understanding that those on our college campuses and those of us with progressive ideals are feeling challenged to describe and defend Israel when we are really wanting to talk about the solidarity that we feel about with the people of Israel. And we commit to you that this is a complicated conversation that we will continue to have with you, that we will continue to have to arm you with the knowledge of what is actually going on. It is why we chose the incredible speaker to join us today. Not only do we have a longstanding relationship with Yossi Klein Halevi, but he is someone who himself has gone through the experience of his political views on Israel to see the humanity on the other side. He most famously first wrote Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist, a story that tells of his teenage years as a follower of a militant right-wing Rabbi Meir Kahana and his subsequent disillusionment with Jewish radicalism. And his most recent book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, a New York Times bestseller, writes letters to his imaginary neighbor in which they try to explore the humanity of each other, to explore the understanding of the history of each other. Yossi Klein Halevi is a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and together with Imam Abdullah Antepi of Duke University, he co-directs the Institute for Muslim Leadership, which teaches emerging young Muslim American leaders about Judaism, Jewish identity, and Israel. I welcome Yossi Klein Halevi to share his wisdom, to help us understand the situation on the ground, and to lead us in conversation as we begin this journey together. Thank you. Am Yisrael Chai.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you, to be back with Milwaukee. Really one of my favorite Jewish communities. I have very warm memories of the time that I spent there with you not so long ago. And delighted especially to be with Shimon, my old friend. You've got a wonderful man there. So this is a wrenching moment. And in the nearly 40 years that I've lived in Israel, and I've lived through Scud missiles on our cities. I raised 2 children during the Second Intifada, the suicide bombings. Like everyone else in this country, I've seen a lot. In some ways, this is one of the most difficult moments that I can recall. And the reason for that is that what we are experiencing is a convergence of assaults. And those assaults are coming from, first of all, of course, from Gaza. It's coming from our streets, where Arab and Jewish mobs are attacking each other, are lynching each other. And it's coming from the international community, which has acted as judge and jury and sentenced us to being the pariahs of this moment. And what I would like to try to do is try to make sense of it with all of you. And so let's begin with Hamas. Hamas, it seems to me, is very much on the defensive. The good news from my perspective is that it appears that the IDF is being far more effective in this round of fighting than it was in the past. The fact that Hamas has repeatedly asked for a ceasefire and the IDF says, no, we're not ready yet to give Hamas the upper hand and have a ceasefire. We have a series of strategic goals here that we need to fulfill. This all, to my mind, bodes well for Israel's military posture. And while the situation in Gaza is desperate and heartbreaking, I also think that it's important to state emphatically that the accusations against Israel of recklessness, of deliberately endangering civilian lives, these are flat out lies. If you consider the extent of the Israeli air bombardment, a week of sustained bombing, and consider as well the fact that most of the casualties have been Hamas operatives, what we are looking at is a very careful campaign. Tragically, there will be civilian lives lost when you're fighting a war of an asymmetrical war between a standing army and terrorists embedded in a civilian population. But I believe that with all the heartache, nevertheless, Israel is really doing its best to minimize civilian casualties. Now, having said all of that, I still have the gnawing sense that Hamas has the upper hand in this phase of the conflict. And Hamas has proven its strategic effectiveness, first of all, by striking the center of the country with impunity. In all of the years of missile attacks, we have never experienced this kind of intensive bombardment of the greater Tel Aviv region. And what we are seeing is that Israel's weakest enemy, which is Hamas, relative to Hezbollah in the north and the Iranians sitting in Syria, our weakest enemy has nevertheless been able to deliver the most devastating blow to the center of the country that we've ever experienced. And so there is a profound anxiety that many of us feel as we consider what this moment really means in terms of our deterrence capacity, in terms of what's facing us in the next round. Hamas has an arsenal that's perhaps 1/10 that of the rocket and missile arsenal of Hezbollah, to say nothing of Iranian, Syrian capabilities. And so this is in some sense an intimation of far worse to come. When I think about the Gulf War of 1990, early 1991, and how an entire nation was sent into what we called then sealed rooms against what we thought might be chemical attacks from Saddam Hussein. And I remember putting gas masks on my children, and they have traumas from that experience to this day. They're now in their 30s. And thinking back to how ineffective Saddam Hussein was, all of 39 clunky Scud missiles sent toward Tel Aviv and Haifa. Today, Hamas is capable in 1 hour of outperforming Saddam's 6-week war that terrorized Israel. And so that should give you some indication of what we're facing. Now, it's true we have the Iron Dome now, but the Iron Dome is about 90% effective. And that is in this current war with our weakest opponents. How the Iron Dome will perform if we're facing not hundreds of rockets, but thousands or tens of thousands is really a question that I think is haunting Israel's security establishment today, because everyone here realizes what the implications are of this round of fighting. Now, the question for Israel really is, how do we fight a war, an asymmetrical war, with terrorists in their civilian population, hiding behind their civilian population, without provoking the world against us? And this is a dilemma that has been recurring for Israel since the 1982 Lebanon War. Bear in mind that the last conventional war that Israel fought was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. That was the last time that the Israeli army fought Arab standing armies. We fought Egypt and Syria then. And those were wars that the world could understand. Certainly our friends could understand. The wars that we've been fighting ever since 1982 have been strategically advantageous to Israel, and no one in Israel has nostalgia for those conventional wars, which were existential conflicts. But the price that we pay for fighting asymmetrical war is that we are seeing a systematic erosion of Israel's stature in the international community. Since the 1982 war, we have moved from one conflict to the other in which our standing is being eroded. Now, I think, again, that on the whole, we have fought this war, this phase of the war, and it really is one ongoing war. We have fought this conflict with relative restraint, with intelligence, and I mean intelligence in both meanings of the word. Clearly, Israeli military intelligence has been superb, and the political intelligence has also been at play. The one potential misstep here is taking down the tower in which several news agencies were based, because, as the army explained, Hezbollah operatives were using the journalists in effect as a shield, hoping for immunity from attack. Now, I feel very torn about this, because on the one hand, I understand the message of the army to Hamas, which is, we will not let you play that game. We will not let you determine the rules of engagement. We will not let you hide behind journalists or hide in other civilian areas, in other ways. And I understand and appreciate the Army's determination here. But I wonder if here is where we needed some political guidance and reining in the clear military logic of the Army. But what we needed from the political echelon, and we didn't get it in this case, is saying, when you deal with the foreign media, yes, it's true, we are being unfairly stigmatized in much of the foreign media, but that perhaps is all the more reason to exercise greater caution, and we didn't do it. And so the question that I have is who is really calling the shots here, and how autonomous is the Army, and is there sufficient political oversight? The next arena, and this you will all be very sensitive to, you're seeing it being played out more intimately than I see from my distance here in Jerusalem. That is the arena of world opinion. And Israel's dilemma is not only that we are now fighting wars that are asymmetrical in nature. And asymmetrical wars, by definition, generate brutal TV images. The scenes of a seemingly invincible army with tanks and planes attacking civilian areas those images are imprinted on world opinion. And Israel's dilemma is that we're not only fighting asymmetrical wars, but we are also a long-term occupier of the Palestinian people. Now, most Israelis will tell you that we tried on numerous times in the past to end this conflict. We offered the Palestinians a state twice in the year 2000 under Ehud Barak, and then under Ehud Olmert in 2009. All true. But when you are engaged in an ongoing conflict that involves asymmetrical war, that you know will generate difficult images, you have to be very careful about how you manage the occupation. And yes, I don't feel guilty about the occupation because I really do believe Israel did what it could to end it. And I think that even if we had a left-wing government in power today, we would not be able to reach an agreement with the Palestinians at this phase. And the notion of withdrawing from the West Bank is terrifying for Israelis because what has happened in Gaza would then, let's say that the odds are that what happened in Gaza when we withdrew would happen again in the West Bank, and this is our most intimate border. And I'm pointing toward the West Bank because I'm literally looking out at the West Bank. I live in the last row of houses at the very border of Jerusalem. On the next hill are 2 Arab villages. The West Bank begins outside my window. And the thought of a Palestinian state there with Gaza as precedent is terrifying. So even though I am among those Israelis who believe deeply that we need a two-state solution, I'm also terrified of it. So all of those reasons notwithstanding, the fact is that we are occupying another people. And we need to be especially sensitive in how we relate to the Palestinians and what those consequences are in terms of what are we projecting to world opinion. Now, we went into this phase of fighting already guilty in the minds of many people around the world because of the Sheikh Jarrah incident. Now, Sheikh Jarrah is a complicated problem. It's a complicated legal problem. Yes, the properties belonged to Jews before the 1948 war. Yes, those properties were confiscated by the Jordanians. And yes, an Israeli court offered the 6 Palestinian families that are now being threatened with eviction a reasonable alternative. Pay minimal rent and you will be able to remain in your homes in perpetuity. But this is not just a cold legal issue. This is also a moral issue, an issue of perception and also of how we are as occupiers. And if we prevent Palestinians from claiming properties that they lost in the 1948 war in West Jerusalem, and I believe that we have every right to prevent Palestinians from reclaiming those properties at this point in the conflict, then we should also apply the same standard to Jewish properties that were lost in 1948. I believe that we need to freeze all property claims from 1948 until we resolve this conflict. Once we resolve the conflict, then we can, once we begin negotiating to resolve this conflict, we can put all of the various property claims on the table, including, by the way, the enormous property claims of close to 1 million Jews who fled or were expelled from Arab countries. And so this is a very complicated issue. But when we allow Jews to prematurely claim their properties from 1948 without applying the same standard to the Palestinians, we shouldn't be surprised if we are going to be perceived in the international community as committing an injustice. And so to go into an asymmetrical war from the Sheikh Jarrah incident is a setup for Israel. What that means is we need to be especially judicious, and I'm using judicious in all of its connotations, when we apply a legal standard, when we apply a moral standard to how we navigate the occupation. The last point that I'd like to raise, and in some ways for me this is the most painful of all, is what has been playing out in the last few days on our streets between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. The situation is frankly unbearable for me. I have spent years working on this issue of the relationship between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. It is my main civic commitment as an Israeli, trying to help integrate Arab Israelis into the mainstream. I believe deeply that the future of Israel depends on figuring out how 20% of our population that is today largely outside the mainstream can become part of Israeliness, can become part of the story of this country. And what we've seen happening in the last days is a near total breakdown of the most minimal civility and trust between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority. We have seen unthinkable scenes of lynchings and attempted lynchings. We've seen synagogues being burned, mosques being vandalized, a frenzy of hatred that has really shocked this country. And the irony is that this is happening after what is probably the most hopeful year in the history of the fraught relationship between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. This year of Corona brought Arabs and Jews closer together than we've ever been. Now, the Corona experience was the first non-security threat, first lethal non-security threat that Israel has ever faced. It's the first lethal threat that had nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict, nothing to do with the Palestinians. And so the Arab Israelis were able to take their place in the national effort in a way that they've never been able to do before. And the Arab Israeli community was especially poised to take advantage of this moment because the Israeli healthcare system is the most integrated sector of Israeli society. Arabs are about 20% of Israeli society, close to 25% of our doctors, and almost 30% of our nurses are Arab. And so we have been experiencing over the last year this great sense of intimacy between Jews and Arabs in the Corona wards, reflected in the media. And for this to happen now is really a shock. Bear in mind as well that until a week ago, we were looking at the very real possibility of a joint Arab-Jewish coalition to replace Netanyahu's government. This was the first time where there was serious talk of bringing in one or more Arab parties if not directly into the coalition, then at least to be supporting the government from the outside. And so for the first time, we were seeing Arab political parties being players in the Israeli political system. So that convergence of the intimacy of the Corona experience together with the experience of a transformed political system really brought hope. I have been more hopeful than at any time that I can remember. I wrote a piece for the Atlantic magazine a few months ago optimistically called Israel's Arab Moment. And it seemed with this alternative government waiting in the wings, it seemed that it was going to finally happen. And then came this war and the war in our streets, and everything unraveled. Now we are still able to muster a counteroffensive of decency. And what we've seen in recent days is that Israel's impressive and extensive network of coexistence groups all around the country have been pushing back. We've had public gatherings. We've had Arabs and Jews getting together and standing at intersections, traffic intersections, defying the missiles, standing together. We've had very moving scenes of Arab and Jewish doctors singing and praying together in the hospital wards. And so there's been a concerted effort to push back. Virtually the entire political system, Arabs and Jews, have condemned the violence on both sides, have been urging calm. And so we are seeing the basic decency of Israeli society holding. And what gives me hope is that we have built enough of an infrastructure here to really begin to see our way out of this disaster. And the last point that I'll mention is that over this last year, we signed 4 peace agreements with Arab countries. And what is so unprecedented about those agreements is not just the quantity. We've never signed 4 peace agreements at one time, but the quality of these agreements. These are the first peace agreements that we've ever had with Arab countries that are not just formal, cold treaties, but actual expressions of mutual longing for normalization. And the good news here is that these agreements are holding. They seem to be holding so far. And we see no sign of a weakening of the commitment of our partners in moving these peace agreements forward. And I'm speaking on the economic level, on the people-to-people level, most of all on the security level. We have very deep security relations with Arab countries today. And that, of course, is a result of the mutual fear of a rising Iran, and frankly, the mutual fear on the part of Israelis and Israel and Arab countries about the renewal of the Iran deal that the Biden administration seems to be committed to. That is a nightmare for all of us here. And that helps bring, ironically, it helps bring Arab Israelis together. So if I have to sum up this moment, it is truly a desperate time. There's no other way to characterize this. This is a moment of agony. Many of us feel that in some ways this is the worst experience that we can remember. Certainly certainly since the Second Intifada, when buses and cafes were blowing up. And again, it isn't only because of the intensity of the rocket fire, but everything else that's happening around it. At the same time, there are reasons for, I won't say optimism, but hope. And an Israeli always makes a distinction between optimism and hope. Optimists believe it will be good. People who hope it will be good. And I think that hope characterizes the Israeli sensibility more than optimism. We are very much a people of hope. And we are going to have to draw on those deep reserves of hope now more than ever before. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with Israel. Thank you for your concern, for your love. We need that, and your prayers. We need those more than ever. Thank you, and Chag Sameach to everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mai Ben Shabbat. I used to be the Shin in Milwaukee for 2018 till 2019. As for today, I'm serving in the Army. I'm a commander in the mixed units in Israel. We serve on the border of Egypt and Jordan, and basically most of the borders on the south of Israel. As for now, the situation in Israel, everything got a little bit more complicated for us. So as for me, what we're doing right now is we mainly do more of our main job on the border of Egypt. And we have concerns that Egypt might have empathy for whatever happening in Gaza or with the Palestinians, and they would want to support them. So we're afraid that ISIS or the Egyptians would do any kind of terrorism attacks on us or would try to do anything. So as for now, we're doing a lot more operational missions, which is more ambushes, more patrols on the border. Also in case of the Israeli army would actually go into Gaza by foot, then my unit would go more north. So we would expand our operational line, and we will also protect the border of Gaza. So everybody else that needs to go into Gaza will be able to. So that is our main daily routine. It's crazy. We have a lot of Tseva Adom red alerts over here, and we need to go always to the shelters. And we also see all the bombing in the skies from here because we're really close to the Gaza Strip. I really hope that we'll have better days and we'll be able to live in peace, and that the whole function of the army will come back to the daily routine that we used to have. And I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that are here to support Israel, to see what's actually going on. I see a lot of things that are in the media that I see the actual pictures of, and I really just want people to educate themselves of what really happening, and that everything can go both sides. So I just wanted to say really a huge thank you, and also that I miss you all, and I wish that I could come back anytime soon to see that everything's okay and to see you all. And I thank you all so much. It was great seeing you all.
My name is Rabbi Wes Kalmar, the Rabbi of Anshe Sfard, Kehillat Torah. I'm going to be saying the prayer for the members of the Israeli Defense Forces, the Mishaberach L'chayei Tzahal. Mishaberach Aboseinu HaMitzchak Yaakov, V'yivarech Es Chayalei Tzva Hagana L'Yisrael. Ha'omedim al Mishmar Tzenu V'arei Eloheinu, Migvul HaLavanon, V'Abinor Mitzrayim, Min Hayam Hagadol Alavo Harava, V'yabasha Ba'avir Uvayam. Yitain Adonai Es Oyeveinu Hakamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'yatzil Es Chayaleinu Mikol Tzar V'Tzukva Mikol Nego Machla. Vishlach bracha v'yatzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. Yad ber soneinu tachtehem v'yatreim b'chesed Yeshua v'ateres nitzachon. V'yukram b'hem hakasuv ki Adonai Elohechem halech imachem lilachem lachem v'evechem lo shi'eschem v'nomar amen. He who blessed our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, may he bless the fighters of the Israel Defense Forces, who stand guard over our land and the cities of our God, from the border of the Lebanon to the desert of Egypt, and from the great sea until the approach of the Arabah, on the land, in the air, and on the sea. May Hashem cause the enemies who rise up against us to be struck down before them. May the Holy One, blessed is He, preserve and rescue our fighting men from every trouble and distress and from every plague and illness. May He send blessing and success in their every endeavor. May He lead our enemies under their sway, and may He adorn them with the crown of salvation and with the diadem of triumph. And may there be fulfilled for them the verse, for it is Hashem your God who goes with you to battle your enemies for you to save you. And let us respond, Amen.
Shalom. My name is Uria Roth, and I'm the Senior Community Shaliach here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am proud to be part of a long dynasty of shlichim that started in 1968, the longest running shlichut in North America and maybe in the whole wide world. I'm so happy to be part of delegation that Israel to Milwaukee and Milwaukee to Israel. And what I'm trying to do, even in a time like that, is actually doing the same thing, trying to bring the voices and the stories from Israel to the community, but also listen to the community and how much they worried and concerned about Israel, how much they concerned about their families and relatives and all their friends in Israel. As part of my work is trying to be there for the community in any given time. But beyond all that, I am an Israeli living here right now in Wisconsin. And all I keep thinking is about the Israel that I left 2 years ago and hoping that it will be the same Israel when I'll come back next year. May this be the last round of violence Israel will ever had, and may this peace will come upon us.
Hello, my name is Shaked Ram, and I am the Jewish Agency Israel Fellow to Hillel Milwaukee. It is not the first time for me to be here as a shlicha while Israel is under attack. I'm a bit torn between wanting to be home in Israel with my family, while also being here in Milwaukee supporting my students. The most difficult thing for me is worrying constantly for my grandparents, knowing they don't have a safe room and they need to run downstairs and sit with their neighbors in the lobby of the 4th floor. While checking in with my family, every time the siren goes off, I see how hard it is for my niece and nephew. Knowing that my 5.5 years old nephew doesn't understand what is going on, why his room isn't safe enough, and why they need to run to shelter and spend the night in the safe room bothers me constantly. I wish they will grow up to not remember what is happening now and will forever feel safe.
Hello, I'm Noam, and I'm the Shin of Milwaukee. I came back from Israel the weekend before everything escalated. I enjoyed seeing my friends and family while being safe. What exactly being at home needs to be. Being here while Israel is under attack is something that I never thought will happen during my Shin here. The Israel I know the Israel you see in social media is not the Israel I know. From being a country that overcame COVID-19 to a place that you need to know where is the closest shelter. Makes me wonder what Israel's future will look like.
Shalom everyone, I'm Richard Newman and I am the cantor at Congregation Sinai, and I join you today for the prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo. Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo. Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. הגן עליה בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך. אבינו, אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו. אבינו, אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו. ושלח אורך ועמיתך לראשיה שריה ויועציה ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך, ותקנן בעצה טובה מלפניך. שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו. אבינו, אבינו שבשמיים.